Hello, today is Friday, January 23rd, and welcome to episode 548 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI Senior Fellow Morgan Vigna, and I'm joined today by Advisory Board Member Lester Munson and NSI Senior Fellows Matthew Hayden and Jessica Jones. So, y'all, we are at the end of Davos. Davos is complete, and it wrapped up with President Zelensky and President Trump having a hour-long meeting where they didn't really take any questions, but we know that it was a positive discussion. It was actually a longer meeting than initially expected. From there, President Zelensky was the pretty girl at the party and gave his big speech before the Davos delegation or audience, in which he actually praised the United States heavily and trashed Europe for their weakness against Russia and their capitulation to Russian pressure. So with that said, we now see, shortly after that, we saw Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff head over to Moscow, where they supposedly met with President Putin. And then today we are seeing trilateral talks in Abu Dhabi, whereby the Russians, Ukrainians, and the Americans for the first time are getting together in the same room, no less, to hash out security discussions, military discussions on the path forward for peace in Ukraine. Needless to say, these talks are not being attended by the most senior officials. Rather, they are being joined by military and security experts or officials on all three sides. So I think a lot of questions here for the group are, what do we make of Zelensky's speech? What do these talks mean? Are we closer to peace? And ultimately, big question here for the Fun Friday is, are Girl Scout cookies going to make the difference here? We flood the market in Girl Scout cookies. All right. Jess, let's start with you.
I like to say I did order Girl Scouts cookies from Morgan, so that's a little plug for her ordering. Zelensky's speech made headlines. He opened talking about a feeling of having Groundhog Day. We love to talk about movies and shows here on the podcast, so he brought up Groundhog Day, and that must be what his life feels like. He does these speeches where there's lines to hear him talk. He gets applause, he gets accolades, but he's making the same speech, right? He's saying Europe needs to get serious. They need to move forward. They need to show some unity. And while he gets applause, nothing really changes. And so he really hammered home that Europe continues to be divided, not united, hesitancy to escalate militarily, lack of, even enforcement when it comes to sanctions, like the list could go on, things that we've talked about here on the podcast. And at the same time, he was able to really praise President Trump. The U.S. as a backstop to security on the continent. And it seems like the two of them are getting along better. We haven't seen any headlines or breakdowns when it comes to their meetings. As you pointed out, they met for over an hour at Davos. And what's crazy, though, it wasn't just about the Ukraine-Russia conflict, right? Actually, Zelensky talked wider, and he brought up Greenland, and that really, if Europe wants to show up, it can't. They need to show up as a global power, right? Right now, they're different countries taking different positions, but that's not going to maintain the world order. So he had a larger critique, right? It wasn't just about the immediate conflict. It's Europe showing up for all of these major issues that are going on globally.
All right. So, Matt, are we on a path towards peace, or should we give war a chance?
So also, it's impressive that you see the leader of Ukraine in Davos, candidly calm. If you are in Ukraine right now, you're dealing with several hundred Shahed-style drone attacks weekly. These are about the size of a car, and they just are wreaking havoc. And the Ukrainian people are becoming like lights out manufacturers at air-to-air combat in drones, so much so that he can come to Davos and give a speech while these buzzing birds of prey are flying into his country. There is active warfare going on, and the president and all his men want literally for there to just be a ceasefire that holds. And so whatever diplomatic pressure the United States can push they're open to it. And leading into these diplomatic talks in Abu Dhabi, they are not introducing any new grenades to roll on the floor. So they're not coming in and saying if. They're just saying, you guys figure this out. Now, at the same time, if we pick up on the tone and tenor of the president, he is also saying in almost every speech, did you see how well our military performed in Venezuela? Did you see how well our military performed in Iran? These are weapons of war no one else has, and they're the best in the world. Those tones are going to carry in if these types of talks don't play out. And so as we have seen hesitancy for weapons of war that the U.S. has that are very, very technical and very, very capable, not necessarily making it into the Ukraine hands because of that offensive challenge and seeing the U.S. broadly engaging further in the war, you're going to start to see that as something that encroaches into that conversation. So at the same time, we're having the EU say we're risk averse. We have a challenge with, really standing up around Greenland. Where the Ukrainians see Greenland is a canopy across the entire Arctic. It takes a very good snapshot of detailed Russian activity from the United States standpoint. If you wanted to have pure intelligence of everything the Russians are doing from the Arctic South, you would want the United States to have all their toys in Greenland as fast as possible. So he has a vested interest in that as well. And it puts him at a knock it off Europe, listen to the United States type posture that is in his country's best interest.
Mm-hmm. So Les, I know you have thoughts here, potentially a fault line, if you will, including very varied opinions on my daughter's sales platform for Girl Scout cookies. So please.
Look, there's part of the current administration that says, well, if Russia could just sell Girl Scout cookies and see how much money you can make and how happy you can make people because they have Girl Scout cookies, they will want to end the war and rejoin the community of nations. All right, that's Fun Friday. My real fault line with Matt, and by the way, I agree with like 85% of what he said. I don't think the tough talk from Trump is about Russia. I think that's about Iran. And that's about him trying to get the mullahs on shakier ground, and it appears to me like we're about to do something there the next few days, if not this weekend. I think the reality of Russia-Ukraine is Putin will not agree to anything unless it looks like he won. If he goes back home to Moscow with a deal that looks like Russia lost, he's dead. Maybe not actually dead, but his presidency is over. He'll be ousted. He'll be the bad guy in Russia because there's real fever here. So he has to look like he has won. And I think the logic, and I have to work hard to see this sometimes, to be totally honest, but I think the logic of what President Trump is doing in his rhetoric is to set it up as a win for Vladimir Putin. Whatever this deal is, he has to make it look like Vladimir Putin has won something for the effort. Now, that's hard to swallow for a lot of us because Russia is in the wrong. They were the aggressor. They didn't need to start this war, et cetera, et cetera. That's all true. Meanwhile, if you're committed to finding a peace agreement in Ukraine, and the logic of that is you have to find a way to make it look like Putin has won.
But question
on
that.
Les, I agree with you too. I agree with that. I would also add that if the United States, if that is indeed the path that this administration wants to take, then we also need to back the Ukrainians to the hilt from a security perspective, ensure that they get those security guarantees, give them the weapons that they need to defend themselves, as well as our Eastern European allies.
But it cannot look like that's our main effort. We're doing that behind the scenes in a lot of ways, maybe not quite enough, but we're doing that behind the scenes. That can't be the lead, or it looks like we're pushing Russia in a corner.
Fair.
Again, I'm just saying that's the logic of what the administration is doing. I'm not saying this is the best idea in the world.
I don't disagree on that. I'm just wondering, in the back, we also, the Board of Peace, the offer for Putin to join the Board of Peace, and he made a little joke about using, frozen Russian assets as his collateral for the $1 billion to join. Do you think the Trump administration thinks they can offer enough tokens outside Ukraine that Putin can go home and say, look at all these other wins, and it would suffice?
I don't think Putin's going to fall for that. He has to look like he's won on the ground in Ukraine.
But there's also a statement with the Board of Peace of this is what the United States means. If you saw the PowerPoint deck that Kushner's using, it's a revitalization of war-torn areas of the world that no one has put forward as economic maps like this before. And it seems almost impossible because of the way you view some of those areas. But if they're even remotely successful, that's going to be a giant bat signal in the sky of this is what we can do together, and you can be a part of it or you won't. And by the way, your economy is really going to take a hit if they don't.
But it's a different situation in Gaza. Hamas has lost, at least largely. They're in a corner. They have to take something. That's the logic of that. Russia's not losing this war. I mean, they're not really winning it, but they're not back in a corner yet on Ukraine. So those are different situations. And by the way, this approach did not work at all with North Korea in the first Trump administration. So,
well, the one thing I'd push back on is they may not be defeated militarily, but their economy is not shooting up. And as you take on additional oil sections, additional oil restrictions, if the United States is successful in Arctic type activities, especially Northern Passage type activities over the next 12 months, Russia takes a big hit if they don't start looking at their economic drivers as a broader play.
I'm not sure that's the highest priority for Russia. It would be for us. I don't think it is for Russia and Putin.
The goal is to make it that.
All right, Matt, you get the last word here. So that is a wrap. Thanks as always to Kelly Crowley, Claude Jennings, and the NSI staff for their help in producing today's episode. Join us on Monday, January 26th for another episode of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's Friday episode that gets you smart, fast on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. We're on YouTube, so just check out our channel for a video of today's episode. If you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.